Karoline Leavitt stood just behind the curtain, listening. The studio was already warm, not from temperature, but from expectation. The laughter had been steady for the last 10 minutes. She'd been backstage long enough to hear every bit of it. The monologue, the throwaway punchlines, the sharp left turns that didn't sound improvised, but were meant to feel that way. Jimmy Kimmel's voice reached her through the stage speaker. And now, ladies and gentlemen, our next guest, former White House staffer, GOP strategist, and someone I'm guessing half of you will want to boo before she says anything. Please welcome Karoline Leavitt. The applause hit like clockwork. Tight, measured, some of it sincere, some of it performative. Karoline walked out. She didn't wave. She didn't smile wide. She gave a quick nod toward the audience, shook Jimmy's hand, firm but brief, and sat down across from him, one leg crossed over the other, spine straight, expression neutral. Jimmy grinned. Karoline, I've got to say, I didn't think you'd actually show. Karoline looked at him and replied, calmly. Then maybe you need to rethink what kind of people you invite. A few audience members laughed, but not because it was a joke, because they didn't expect her to walk in unshaken. Jimmy held up a card. He glanced down at it, then back at her. I want to start with something light, he said. You worked in the Trump White House, right? Karoline nodded once. Yes. Jimmy shrugged. I just want to know, when you took that job, did you think, this is where the truth goes to get made, or this is where the truth goes to die? The audience laughed again. Harder. Karoline didn't blink. She said, I thought I was entering a place where people didn't need media applause to know what they believed. Jimmy leaned back, mock surprised. Oof. You came in swinging. Karoline replied. No. I came in expecting you'd swing first. I just didn't flinch. There was a pause. A subtle shift in energy. The audience still smiled. But their posture changed. Because they could tell she wasn't here for the laugh. And she wasn't here to win them over. She was here to hold her place. Jimmy tapped the next card on his desk. All right, let's talk about free speech. You've been critical of the press. The left. Pretty much everyone except your team. But the second someone challenges your people, suddenly it's censorship. How does that work? Karoline looked at him. Her tone didn't sharpen. Her voice didn't rise. But her clarity did. I've been critical of institutions that pretend to be neutral. If someone attacks us and owns it, fine. But if they attack and then say, we're just the referees, that's not free speech. That's narrative control. Jimmy raised both eyebrows. So, narrative control is bad when they do it. But messaging's fine when it's you. Karoline said. Messaging is fine when we admit it's messaging. What you do is shape opinion and call it comedy. The audience gave a soft, oh, not outrage, not delight, just surprise. Because again, she wasn't folding. She was refusing the frame. Jimmy leaned in. Karoline, this is a late-night show. I tell jokes. I talk to celebrities. You're the one treating this like crossfire. Karoline said. Because people like you get to hide behind the joke when you push a narrative. I don't get that shield. I have to say what I mean and wear it. Jimmy smiled tightly. Then why come here at all? Karoline's answer came fast. Because I don't think the room should only belong to people you agree with. At that, the audience got quieter. Some looked down. Some shifted. Because the discomfort wasn't just on stage anymore. It was everywhere. Jimmy picked up a different card. Tried a new rhythm. Okay. So what do you say to people who think you're just a very young voice for very old ideas? Karoline replied. I say look at the words. Not the age of the person saying them. If the words hold up, your discomfort with me is about image, not argument. Jimmy asked. But if the words are harmful? Karoline answered. Then prove they're wrong. Don't just say they make you uncomfortable. The silence now was not empty. It was charged. Because Karoline wasn't reacting. And Jimmy wasn't joking. And the audience wasn't sure who this moment belonged to anymore. Jimmy Kimmel leaned forward. Not to connect. To contain. His voice wasn't joking anymore. All right, he said, let's stop dancing. Why do you think people don't take you seriously outside your base? Karoline Leavitt looked directly at him. Her voice didn't move above conversation level. But the weight behind it didn't need elevation. Because I don't perform outrage. I don't smile through hostility. And I don't soften what I mean just to stay in the room. Jimmy held her gaze. Then said, You think I'm hostile? Karoline replied. I think this entire setup is built to make me look like a contradiction. You invite me here expecting I'll either fold or explode. But you're not built for someone who just holds. The audience wasn't laughing. Not because it was tense. Because they could feel that laughter wouldn't protect them from what was happening now. Jimmy picked up the next card. It shook slightly in his hand. Not from nerves, but from uncertainty. This wasn't the interview he'd written. He asked, "So are you here to say everyone's wrong about you?" Karoline replied, "No. I'm here to say it doesn't matter if they are. What matters is whether I can say something in this chair without being edited into a character." Jimmy paused, then asked, "And who are you when no one edits?" She said, "Someone who walks into rooms that don't clap and still finishes her sentence." There was a beat of silence. Then Jimmy asked, "Is that supposed to impress me?" Karoline answered, "It's not supposed to do anything. That's the point. I didn't come here to shape your response. I came here to prove I could exist outside of it." From behind the camera, the floor manager looked toward the booth. A producer whispered, "She's not breaking." The director replied, "She's not playing." Jimmy tried again. Different tactic. Lower tone. "What do you think my audience should hear from you tonight?" Karoline didn't pause. That someone they disagree with can sit in their space, not apologize, not combust, and not become the villain they need her to be. He raised an eyebrow. "So you think this is about them, not you?" She nodded. "I think this is always about them. You write the segment. You feed the rhythm. You prep the laughter. And you never think the guest might bring something too heavy to carry inside that frame." Jimmy exhaled through his nose. Not annoyed. Just shifted. "You've got an answer for everything," Karoline said. "That's what happens when you expect to be interrupted before you finish your thought." The room stayed quiet. Even the crew had stopped signaling. Something was unfolding that didn't belong to any of them anymore. And Karoline Leavitt, young, calm, steady, wasn't giving the moment away. She was building it. Jimmy finally asked, "What do you want people to take from this?" Karoline said, "That I walked into a room built to disarm me and didn't hand you the ammunition." Jimmy Kimmel sat still. Not frozen, just reset. The desk in front of him felt smaller now. He glanced once toward the teleprompter, but there was nothing there for him anymore. He looked back at Karoline Leavitt. "You've said a lot tonight," he said. "But do you really think it matters if no one in this room wants to hear it?" Karoline nodded once. "Yes, because saying it anyway is how rooms like this stop being closed." Jimmy let the silence linger, then asked, "So you don't care how this plays?" Karoline's reply was clean. "I care that it happened, not how you edit it." Backstage, a producer gestured toward the booth. "We're off track," she whispered. "Do we cut?" The director didn't move. Another producer said, "Cutting her now will make it worse." "Worse for who?" came the reply. No one answered. Back on stage, Jimmy leaned forward. He wasn't mocking now. He was trying. "You know, you're not the first person to push back in this chair. But most people at least try to connect." Karoline said, "That's because most people want the chair. I don't." Jimmy's voice got quieter. "Then why are you here?" Karoline looked straight at him. "To prove I don't need to be welcome to speak." The audience didn't shift. They weren't sure what was happening anymore, but they could feel the terms had changed. Karoline adjusted her posture. Not casually, decisively. Jimmy noticed. He asked, "Are you about to walk off?" Karoline said, "No, I'm about to stand up." Jimmy gave a forced smile. "Same thing." Karoline shook her head once. "Not tonight." Then she did it. She stood. No speech. No dramatics. Just motion. She placed both hands on the edge of the desk for one breathless beat, then stepped back from her chair. Jimmy asked, voice low, "So this is your message?" Karoline looked at him for the last time and said, "No. This is what happens when the message no longer fits inside the performance." Then she turned and walked off stage, without waiting for permission. No music played. No one clapped. The camera light stayed on, confused. And Jimmy Kimmel, always ready with a punchline, said nothing. Because there wasn't one. Just a woman who came to speak, refused to shrink, and decided she didn't need the platform to stay visible. Jimmy Kimmel didn't speak right away. Karoline Leavitt was already gone. The echo of her footsteps had barely faded when he looked into the camera and said, softly, "Well, that was different." There were a few scattered laughs, but they didn't last, because no one could tell if Jimmy was joking. Not even Jimmy. Backstage, the control room was quiet. A producer whispered, "Do we cut the segment?" Another shook her head. "If we cut it, we validate it. If we air it, we own it." The showrunner stood behind them both, arms crossed, expression blank. Finally, he said, "Air it. As is. Don't touch a frame." Jimmy looked down at the cards in front of him. He turned them over one by one, not reading them, just removing them from the table. Then he looked up and said, "We invite people on this show expecting them to fit into something. Usually they do. Tonight, she didn't." He paused. "I'm not going to spin it." She didn't storm out. She didn't fold. She just didn't stay. The audience stayed still. Not because they agreed. Not because they didn't. But because something in the room hadn't reset yet. Later that night, the segment aired in full. No edits. No music cues. No voiceover. Just the full 23 minutes of tension, precision, and refusal. It didn't trend, but it didn't vanish either. Clips circulated quietly. Some praised Jimmy for letting it play out. Some said she hijacked the space. But the most repeated quote came from someone who had just watched the raw footage and posted. That wasn't a clash. That was a woman standing so still the room couldn't hold her. Jimmy didn't comment further. But the next night, he opened the show without a monologue. He just looked into the camera and said, "We're not always ready for the guests who don't ask to be liked. But sometimes, they say more by leaving than we do by staying." Then he went on with the show. But something in his rhythm stayed slower. As if he'd learned that not every silence needs a joke. The day after the episode aired, Karoline Leavitt said nothing. No statement. No tweet. No appearance. And yet, the space she'd left behind refused to collapse. Clips circulated. Not viral, not loud, but steady. The kind of steady that doesn't burn through timelines. It settles. It waits. It spreads in quiet rooms. On a college campus in New Hampshire, a political science professor played the segment without comment. No title slide. No discussion prompt. Just the raw interview. When it ended, no one raised a hand right away. One student finally said, "She didn't get kicked off." Another added, "She walked off before the room got to reshape her." And the professor, who hadn't spoken until then, nodded. What you're watching is refusal. And refusal, when it's quiet, is sometimes the loudest thing there is. In late-night writers' rooms across the country, other hosts asked their producers, "Are we ready for guests like that?" Most didn't answer, because guests like that don't make for clean segments. They don't generate clips. They don't give you the turn. They just hold and force the audience to sit in what doesn't resolve. Jimmy Kimmel didn't address the walk-off again. But in the week that followed, something shifted. He interrupted guests less. He tossed fewer notes. He paused longer after difficult answers. And one night, when a guest tried to turn a difficult moment into a bit, Jimmy didn't meet the rhythm. He just asked calmly, "Can we sit in that for a second?" Karoline was asked to appear on 3 other networks in the days after. She declined them all. When a member of her team asked why, she said, "Because the walk-off wasn't a stunt. It was an answer. And I don't repeat answers just because the room didn't like how it landed." 3 weeks later, Jimmy Kimmel was asked in an off-camera roundtable with journalism students, "What was your most difficult guest this year?" He didn't laugh, didn't dodge. He just said, "The one who left without flinching. The one who didn't come to entertain us." The room was quiet. Then someone asked, "Would you have her back?" Jimmy paused. "If she said yes, I'd sit down. But this time, I wouldn't ask for the last word." Karoline Leavitt never referenced the show again. She gave speeches. She worked campaigns. She moved forward. But never once did she build anything from the moment, because she'd already said everything she needed to by walking away. When asked privately, at a donor event, what she thought of how it played on air, she said, "It wasn't supposed to play. It was supposed to end when I stood." That was the message. Clips from the episode still circulate. Not often, not loudly, but in quiet circles, classrooms, forums, moments where people study tone, resistance, presence. And the clip most often shared is not her strongest point. It's the one where she simply pushes the chair back, presses her hands to the desk, and says, This is what happens when the message no longer fits inside the performance. No music under it. No reaction shot. Just a woman leaving with her shape intact.